And thank you so much for joining us for our 45th episode of YCP's virtual monthly series, Refiner's Fire, where Catholic business leaders from diverse industries share professional and spiritual wisdom in just short 30-minute live sessions. In spite of the short length of these segments, we hope that the tips and insights will be extremely powerful for all of us as we strive to work and witness for Christ. Now, the name of our micro interview series, Refiner's Fire, it actually comes from scripture, from Malachi chapter 3, verse 2, where we learn that God is like a refiner's fire who seeks to purify us and make us the best that we can be. And at the end of the day, that's the whole point of this series. Through the inspiration and wisdom of these exceptional Catholic leaders, we are challenged to improve in just small ways in our professional and spiritual lives. So let's be open to this journey of refinement together so that in everything we do it aiming for that higher standard of excellence that gives glory to God. So, for our topic this month, we'll be chatting with Dr. Jon Kirwan about virtue and leadership. And now, virtue is really at the heart of the Catholic understanding of leadership. And this distinct character based approach, corroborated by recent research, promises to really revolutionize one's ability to lead in a complex and changing world. Now, Dr. Jon, he is the Associate Professor of Theology and the Director of the Doctor of Education program at the University of St. Thomas. So without further ado, Dr. Jon, welcome in. We are extremely blessed to have you with us today.
Derek, thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you.
Absolutely, you as well. And, I don't want to waste anybody's time today, so I really just want to jump in. And, the first question I wanted to ask, could you really help us break down how virtue really just promises to help us revolutionize one's ability to lead in a world that can be very complex and is also ever changing?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that might be helpful is why virtue leadership, and why is virtue leadership different from any of the other innumerable leadership theories. So a little background in terms of the leadership industry might be a little bit helpful. Leadership industry, the leadership studies have only been around for about 80 years. They begin to emerge in the late 30s. And what we see is that, kind of every decade or so, they shift, and they're largely driven along by whatever the winds of a particular prevailing psychology are. So in the 1940s, we had something called the great man theory. And this is this idea that great leaders are just born, and that's all there is to it. They rise to the fore, and there's nothing you can do to shape them. Well, with B.F. Skinner and some of this behaviorism came along, and then there was a theory in the 50s that, well, no, we can kind of make leaders in a kind of a laboratory style environment. Anybody can be a leader. And we went on, and there was never any settled consensus. And in fact, now leadership has become a $266 billion global industry. And kind of the dirty little secret in the leadership industry is that there is absolutely no consensus on, who can be a leader, what a leader is, what qualities, really mark a leader. And but yet we're kind of awash in, kind of an endless flow of certificates and degrees and webinars and TED Talks and YouTube videos and certifications and books and articles, all promising us that they're going to make us into the next great leader. So what's really interesting is this could easily kind of push one to lose hope that leadership theory has anything to offer us, right? Well, why don't we just go back, to the Catholic tradition, and we'll, kind of re-examine statesmanship or something like that. Go back to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Well, what's really interesting is that in the late 90s, positive psychology comes along, and a guy named Dr. Martin Seligman became head of the APA, and he said, "Look, we've been studying pathology long enough. Let's study what makes human beings flourish, what makes human beings happy." And so suddenly we have this kind of very secular, cross-cultural approach that finds, lo and behold, that that the things that make people happy really are consistent across cultures, across various, kind of socioeconomic strata, across all kinds of, variants. And this flies in the face of with much of what we constantly hear about, relativism and the subjectivity of happiness, that no one's going to tell you what makes you happy. So this stuff starts to come into leadership theory in the early 2000s. And it's really interesting because what this does is it really corroborates much of what Aristotle was saying in his virtue ethics. And so Catholic leadership theorists picked this up and said, well, wait a second. Not only are you guys talking about Aristotle and prudence and justice and temperance and fortitude, you're talking about eudaimonia, which is this Greek word for human flourishing. Aquinas said all these things, but he said them even in a more profound and a more developed way. So here we are now. Suddenly, we've got this kind of secular stream of leadership theory that is data driven. It's being published in peer reviewed journals, talking about virtue. And virtue was really seen as an anti-modern, a pre-modern concept, because what does it imply? It implies a stable human nature. It implies that human beings will flourish in a certain way. It implies an objectivity, a realism, right? That somehow if we're going to be happy and successful, we need to conduct ourselves in a way that is revealed by reality itself, right? So this is all really, really interesting. And what it does is it suddenly corroborates this 2,500 year classical tradition. And it corroborates what the church fathers said, what the medievals were saying. And it really opens up some interesting engagements. And what it shows us is that not only can we use these contemporary peer-reviewed, data-driven studies, but they open us up to the tradition. And we find that, for example, with humility or prudence or courage, that the ancients and the Catholic doctors and fathers said these things. They articulated these leadership principles in a much more profound way than the moderns are doing, but yet we can use them both in a complementary way. So that's one of the things that's interesting, is that that leadership really kind of demands that we, first and foremost, take stock of ourselves, right? Virtue leadership, it demands that we take stock of ourselves, and that leadership begins with self-knowledge. It begins with kind of a brutal self-knowledge, where we really, seek in a kind of a contemplative and quiet spirit to really articulate what our, kind of where our strengths and weaknesses lie. What are our philosophical, our theological, our spiritual commitments, and how do we build bridges with our teams? How do we sometimes rupture these kind of threads that bind teams together? And so what it does is it provides a coherent and a comprehensive view of the human person that allows us then to understand and articulate and to really kind of siphon and assess all of these other leadership books that are thrown at us. So, for example, there's so many good leadership books. I mean, we can think of like all the stuff that Patrick Lencioni has done on team building and the dysfunctions of team. We can think of Jim Collins and his book Good to Great. We can think about Goldman's book on emotional intelligence. Like, there's gold in those hills. And what they're saying, and there's a simplicity and a practical application, but yet what we find is they're articulating in an easily digestible form what the ancients were saying a long time ago. And so this virtue theory allows us to kind of not just kind of pick into the grab bag of leadership theory. Like, you've got to be a visionary and you've got to figure out how to motivate. And this book's going to help you to hack the brain to figure out how to, be a more charismatic leader. And this book is going to teach you how to be a servant leader, right? But what virtue leadership is going to do is, once you understand virtue theory and you dive deeply into this, is that it will help you to discern good leadership from less than stellar leadership theory. And it'll really help you to bring together the threads of good leadership so that you can integrate them into kind of a whole, kind of program of personal development, which is what virtue theory does. It provides a packaged way to think about yourself in the world and move towards development. And it does it better than anything else. So yeah, kind of a big picture introduction to this whole thing.
And I appreciate you sharing that as well too, Dr. John. And going off that, I wanted to ask next, just because I know a lot of our Catholic brothers and sisters that are tuning in and listening today, a lot of them, have stepped into leadership roles or are currently stepping into leadership roles and really trying to figure out how they can be the best leader. And for those that may have not been introduced to virtue theory, that may have just been, in the secular world and learning from the Jim Collins of the world and these other great secular books and podcasts, whatever it may be, what do you think is that first stepping stone to really dive into virtue theory and really start implementing that in their own leadership abilities, or if they are preparing to be a leader or a manager in their workplace, how can they use some type of stepping stone to start diving deeper into it that might not look threatening or feel like it's overwhelming?
Absolutely. So, well, the first thing is that you have to challenge yourself a little bit, because virtue theory, what it does is, as I mentioned, it really implies that human beings have a stable human nature and they flourish in a certain way, and human beings are oriented towards excellence, but oftentimes we're our own worst enemies. And so we think of the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, as kind of corresponding to the faculties of the human person, the kind of the range of human action, thinking and action. And this is, virtue leadership, kind of is it's a philosophy, right? And so now some people are thinking, well, I don't have time for philosophy, right? It's too much. I took a philosophy course in college or something like that. Well, Chesterton has something to say about this. You're going to be a philosopher whether you like it or not. You're either going to do a little bit of legwork to piece together your own philosophy, or else you're going to be stuck gathering together the shards of all of the other kind of broken and incoherent philosophies of relativism, materialism, hedonism, positivism that our culture throws at you. Here's one line. There's a great little paper that's online by Chesterton on why we need good philosophy. And he says the best reason for a revival of philosophy is that unless a man has philosophy, certain horrible things will happen to him. He will be practical and he will cultivate efficiency, on and on and on. And this is really the danger of this cult of efficiency, and it was even kind of condemned. Some implications of it in the era of Americanism that Pope Leo XIII spoke of. It's this ultra efficient mindset, what Joseph Pieper called, kind of man fundamentally, metaphysically as worker. And so it's very important to do the contemplative, the philosophical legwork to understand this. So where do you start? Well, by everyone's admission, the best place to kind of get a handle on virtue theory is Joseph Pieper's The Four Cardinal Virtues, where he takes virtue theory and he brings it down to the level of the layman, but yet in a way that's still, it's not too popularized. And so the way we think about virtues is this, okay? First of all, the charioteer of the virtues, as it is called, is the virtue of prudence. And prudence is what directs our mind. Prudence takes, eternal principles. It takes objective norms, and it applies these things to the concrete, messy world of particular actions and practicalities, right? And this is one of the things that makes leadership so daunting, is that you have to make so many tough practical decisions, right? So prudence is the virtue of the intellect. Now, remember, prudence, one of the reasons that prudence will never, that virtue theory will never sell like certifications and webinars, is that it's a lifelong process, and that it is through habituation, right? It is through, a countless small decisions where we choose the good, we choose the harder road, that we then kind of grow and become a virtuous person. There's no techniques and shortcuts. Okay, so by doing prudent things. Now Aquinas, he gives us 12 rules for being for being prudent people. How do we develop good habits of thought so that we can be kind of move towards wisdom? When people look at us, they'll say that's a wise leader. Okay, we can talk about that if you want. Courage, right? Justice is doing the right thing. So once you know what the right thing to do is, and there could be, multiple good paths, there could be multiple good options, right? It's not always black and white, but once you, go down the road of choosing to do the good, you have to do the good. And this is the virtue of justice, right? Justice is the virtue of the will, and it is simply doing the good. It is giving people their due. The virtue of courage then keeps us doing the right thing. Once we know what to do, we've chosen a course of practical action, right? This is not kind of a speculative truth. This is not theoretical, right? We know that lying is wrong. We know that stealing is wrong. You've made a concrete action. Okay, you've chosen a path. You're going to fire this person. You're going to hire this person. You're going to go with this strategic plan and not that strategic plan. You're going to go with this marketing firm. There's kind of innumerable ways. You're gonna, there's all kinds of messy HR situations that you've got to kind of navigate through, right? There's legal issues, internal counsel, external counsel, right? You're bombarded with these decisions, in innumerable ways every day. So then we have courage, and courage kind of helps you to do the right thing, no matter what external obstacles present themselves. And courage, Aquinas writes about courage in some of the most beautiful way. It's a mix. It's kind of a graceful mix between endurance and attack, and usually it involves endurance. And if we don't have prudence, we're attacking when we should be patient and endure, or we're enduring when we should attack. And finally, temperance, deals with self-regulation, right? It deals with curbing our appetites, because when we are prone to kind of do things in excess, whether it's whatever, not taking care of ourselves physically, then this will have, this will impede our ability to right reason. It'll impede our courage, our fortitude. And so we have these kind of four virtues that together. This is, once you kind of get a real handle on these virtues, then, this is what's interesting is, so for example, right, let's take prudence. It's like, all right, how do I cultivate my mind? How do I embark on this lifelong journey of cultivating intellectual virtue so that I can think well, right? There's no good leadership without prudence. Okay. So Aquinas has these 8 integral parts. Okay. Integral parts, meaning it's a technical term, but these kind of 8 things that are involved in prudence. So memory. Okay. All right. So are you learning from your mistakes, right? Are you thinking deeply about, your successes, your failures? Are you learning from other people's mistakes? Are you cultivating this? How many times have we made the same mistake twice, right? You shouldn't be making you shouldn't be making the same mistake too many times, right? If you are, then really, there's a degree of self-knowledge that's lacking. And, this idea of memory we should be kind of have this corrective dimension. All right. How about, kind of deliberation, right? Docility, right? Docility. Now, Aquinas talks about docility, this ability to, kind of to listen to feedback, right? I mean, this is what Lencioni has done better than anybody else, right? Is talking about team building. I mean, this is where, Aquinas's virtue of docility really comes into play. And we all see this. We all have seen great leaders. And one of the things that characterizes all of them is their ability to work with teams, to establish teams, to strengthen teams, to form teams. And they understand, they work a team, and their ability to take advice and to listen, right? This is one of Jim Collins' issues, that one of Jim Collins' things. Stephen Covey talks about this, listening before, you kind of answer. But this ability to work in teams, Lencioni's new book on working geniuses is great for kind of team development. And so, but it's really this kind of teamwork that Aquinas is getting at with this notion of docility. And Aquinas talks about foresight. Is your team really able to kind of game things out, right? All right, if we do this, if we take this course of action, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. If we take this course of action, this could happen. This is foresight. Circumspection. This is another thing that really comes in team. This ability. All right, are we missing anything before we make this move? We go with this person. We make this personnel change. We go with this company. Are we missing things? What other factors are we not considering here? Right. So this caution, right? All right. What are potential evils that might, that might, kind of arise from taking these courses of action? Right. This is all teamwork, right? So, I mean, for example, putting a team together. I mean, this brings us back to, this brings us back to Jim Collins' famous analogy about the bus, right? That before a company develops a strategy, they need to develop a team, because the strengths of the team are really going to determine what the strategy is, right? And it's going to even shape the mission statement. And so, I mean, Jim Collins talks about, first thing you need to do is get the people that need to be on the bus, to get them on the bus, and get the people off the bus that need to be off the bus, right? So right away, I mean, this takes us into, the whole virtue of fortitude, which is what's required to make really difficult reorganization or personnel decisions, right? And I mean, how often have we seen, necessary personnel decisions not made or ignored or the can kicked because of a lack of courage, right? To either go on the attack or to endure. And so sometimes, as I said, we attack when we endure when we attack, and prudence really dictates this. So, I mean, what we've all seen, anybody who's worked in nonprofit, especially Catholic nonprofit, is the tendency to not get people off the bus that need to be off the bus, because we say, well, this is a Catholic mission. We're mission driven. We don't want to do this to these people. We need to be charitable. We need to be patient. I mean, can you imagine if Ignatius of Loyola and the early Jesuits, I mean, the early Jesuits, they used to turn people away left and right. I mean, imagine if Ignatius kind of let people into his order, into the early Society of Jesus. Well, where's this guy going to go? Maybe the Franciscans won't take him either, so, I mean, we can be, there are 1,000 quiet ways to be a coward in an institution. I was once teaching a doctoral class on, we were talking about courage, and we were reading Pieper's chapter on courage. We were saying, all right, let's just list all of the ways that we can all, including ourselves, that we can all be cowards in an institution, right? Well, we can't take this action because a policy, or we have to do this, even though we know it's not the right thing, because this is what the external counsel says, and we don't want to run into anything, or the handbook, we know the handbook needs to be revised, but this is what it says, or this is not my decision, this is coming from up top, or, we can justify things. But for example, let's just run with this. When we don't make a personnel decision, say we have a kind of problematic employee who's causing disruption, right? When we choose to take the easier road and not deal with this person, even though this falls within our sphere of responsibility, not only have we kind of infringed on, not only have we not been successful in the virtue of courage, right? We've also may well have kind of contradicted the virtue of justice, which what happens when people are on the bus that shouldn't be on the bus is our coworkers suffer, their direct reports suffer, right? So therefore we're failing in our duty to do justice to them. So virtue really it sets us on a journey of intense introspection and intense self-discovery. And just close with this for right now. I mean, it's really fascinating where you have some really major currents in leadership theory are saying, what we've discovered is that the leadership begins with self-knowledge, right? So this is really contrary to so much leadership out there. You can think about this best-selling book like The Leadership Theory, or the 48, I think it's called The 48 Laws of Power, or we could name a number of other best-selling. And it's like leadership begins with heart and enthusiasm, vision, charisma. And it's like, no, this leadership theory that's aligning with virtue is saying, no, it doesn't begin with any of those things, although they may well be important. It begins with self-knowledge. So it's kind of amusing, but it's also consoling when we see leadership theory and these leadership nerds, these university professors like myself, they're saying, guess what? The latest leadership theory says that we really need to begin with self-discovery, with self-knowledge. And so it's like, fantastic. We're so happy. Come and sit on our lap. We've got a 2,500-year tradition of thinking deeply about self-knowledge. You can, where Socrates, where his philosophical journey was begun, was when his friend went to the Temple of Delphi. And as you enter the Temple of Delphi, right, there's you enter under this archway that says, know thyself. The church fathers picked this up and realized it was so important. Of course, Aquinas, the medievals picked this up, and this still continues to be important in our day and age in terms of Catholic spirituality and moral theology, this know thyself. So this is kind of, kind of a big picture intro, get Pieper's 4 cardinal virtues. And then there's lots of stuff online. There's lots of great articles, and this new kind of stream of virtue leadership theory that's secular. It has a terrible name, but it is what it is. We're not going to change it now. It's called authentic leadership. And this word authentic, it kind of comes from Heidegger, and it got popularized by Sartre. And it now it just means, like, I don't know what it means. If you call someone, oh, they're really authentic, it usually means they're sociable, or they have developed social skills or something like that. But it's called authentic leadership. So I would suggest, very much, kind of digging into this, and those are some great resources to begin with.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing those, Dr. Jon. And before we dive into some audience questions, here's why. I really just wanted to thank you for kind of taking us through that journey, because even like looking back on some of the notes and the things that you took us through, like this idea of taking us through this potentially looking daunting journey of, virtue theory, it almost broke down an actual the path to get to sainthood as well too, because we can look at it as such a daunting road, but it really stems down to understanding, how do we challenge ourselves? How do we just demand and orient ourselves towards excellence? And then just us making these small but hard decisions each and every day towards that path. So I appreciate you breaking it down that way, because it makes a lot of sense. But I know I could take up a lot more of your time, but I want to get to some audience questions as I see them coming in here as well. So would love to jump into some audience questions.
Great.
So from Steve, how does the 3 theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity interact with the 4 cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance?
So that's a great question, and that's a big topic. I will, to send you, because I'm not going to do justice to that, but there's an article in New Blackfriars, which is a theology journal, and it's by a professor named John Love, and if you deal in and it's on the virtue of prudence, and he gets in when Aquinas treats of the cardinal virtues, he's treating them under the aspect of grace, but kind of the psychological implications of the cardinal virtues treated under the aspect of nature is still relevant, and it's consistent. So, I mean, when we are talking about the cardinal virtues under the aspect of grace, right? Kind of after baptism for Catholics, then, we have other helps that are there for us, right? And so there are all kinds of, spiritual threads that will, assist us in the process of growing in prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, right? But the psychological kind of boundaries in terms of how we cooperate with that, it's pretty consistent between the natural and the supernatural. So, and this, this is a really good question. So remember, leadership theory, virtue leadership theory, is not just simply about, don't worry about the profit margin, right? Don't worry about, fulfilling the strategic plan. You just need to go on your own virtue crusade. The whole point of leadership theory that the seculars have stumbled onto is that, when you, the strategic planning, revenue, all of those things are, milestones and markers are all really important, but they're not the most important. And so virtue leadership theory says, when you concentrate on growing in virtue and, kind of flourishing, and you concentrate on institutional flourishing, which means your team is growing in virtue, then what this data seems to say is the institution actually is going to do better anyway. You're going to reach your timelines, your strategic plan is going to be checked off. Revenue is going to increase. You're going to flourish, but your main emphasis is on a kind of institutional virtue. So, all right, to bring it back to that question, right? I mean, here's where even, especially with a Catholic organization, right, the spiritual dimension of this is, a Catholic organization is kind of brings itself under the mantle of grace. So, it has all of these resources to draw upon to kind of increase in prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude in terms on a theological level and not just a natural level. So great question.
Awesome. Thanks again for the question, Stephen. Just for the sake of time, we have time for one more question. So from Emma, what's a good starting place for someone that is looking to grow in self-knowledge?
So what we've done is, I see it's 12:30. Derek, do I have a minute here
You do, yeah, we're good.
Okay, so for example, I could give you kind of the secular authentic leadership virtue, definition of self-knowledge, right? And it kind of, you need to know yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, it's value clarification, all of these kind of buzzwords. But what we do in my doctoral program is we say, all right, actually a real, kind of a really understanding of self-knowledge has these concentric circles. So sure, there is an emotional self-knowledge. You can look at that book by Goldman in Emotional Intelligence, which is great, and it really confirms a lot of what Aristotle said about emotional regulation, right? But then there's also spiritual self-knowledge, right? So you can go to let's go to Augustine's Order of Loves. This is the original values clarification, where Augustine says everything needs to be ordered to God and in the right order. Right. So it's a real introspection theologically. It's a philosophical introspection, right? In terms of, really embracing a robust philosophical realism, understanding the demands of the natural law, understanding, with a philosophical realism, we throw ourselves in and receive from reality. And this means opening ourselves to human beings on even a philosophical level. There's a moral self-awareness. I mean, there's a great there's a great sermon by John Henry Newman, and I can close with this, and where he gives a sermon on self-knowledge. Thus, self-knowledge is at the root of all real religious knowledge, and it is in vain, worse than vain. It is a deceit and a mischief to think to understand the Christian doctrine as a matter of course, merely by being taught by books or attending by sermons. And he goes in and talks about how important it is to dive in and understand all of our secret faults. Lastly, I would just say there's one more level of self-knowledge that the tradition gives us. We could talk about humility with Teresa of Avila or Catherine of Siena, but of course, and it's really interesting. Even data is showing this, that self-knowledge comes through basically putting a good team together, right? Well, this is Aristotle on friendship, right? So we can go to the Nicomachean Ethics and the friend as another self. In kind of in the eyes of the friend, the virtuous friend, we're able to see ourselves in a way that we were not able to up until that point, because the friend in so many ways sees us more clearly than we even see ourselves. So I would say the self-knowledge, I mean, this is, kind of even the various aspects, the 5 or 6 aspects that I just listed of self-knowledge, all really open up to kind of fertile ground for kind of planting seeds of self-discovery.
Awesome. Thanks again for the question, Emma. And Dr. Jon, I just want to thank you for the time. Wanted to thank you for just journeying with us through this topic of just leadership and virtue. And really just want to thank you for your advice, your leadership, and your witness in the Catholic space today. So I appreciate you hopping on with us and spending the day with us.
Derek, thanks so much. It was a real pleasure to have you. And thanks for all the work you guys are doing at CYP.
Thank you so much.